Landlords who treat disabled tenants differently from non-disabled tenants can't. They're guilty of discrimination, according to a recent landmark ruling by a human rights board. Hello and welcome to another edition of DNet, the Disability Network. I'm Joe Coughlin. We'll take a look at that landmark human rights decision shortly. Also on today's show, we'll find out what people who are blind think about access to information on television. We'll see how the combination of computer technology and the Blissboard system is leading to more independence for people with physical disabilities. And since this is our last show of the season, we'll introduce you to some of the magazines that can keep you informed about disability topics till we return in the fall. But first, here's our top story. Earlier this year, a board of inquiry set up under the Ontario Human Rights Code made a disability-related ruling that's being hailed by human rights activists. It's the first time in Canada that a human rights board has proven a tenant was harassed due to a disability. The ruling sends a strong signal to landlords. They can't discriminate when providing housing to disabled people, and any interference with tenants based on disability will not be tolerated. Marilyn Ginsberg is legal counsel for the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Ginsberg, who presented the case, says it represents a second level of protection under the Human Rights Code.
Is that once an individual who has a disability has obtained housing, the landlord cannot harass that person, either in day-to-day affairs or, in fact, as a way of getting rid of them as a tenant.
The case began in Brantford, Ontario in 1986. Karen Aquilina, now 23, rented a basement apartment in this house. Her landlady, Stephanie Picoy, lived upstairs. Aquilina has cerebral palsy, some cognitive deficiency, and a visual impairment. The apartment was her first attempt to live on her own, and by both accounts, the initial relationship between landlady and tenant was amiable.
She would even invite me up to watch TV because I did have a TV at that time. And we had coffee. And after the program, which ended at 9:30, she would want me to go down to my apartment and go to bed.
It was an early indication to Karen Aquilina that her landlady wanted her to follow a particular set of rules. Stephanie Picoy clearly saw Aquilina as someone she could help, guide, and protect.
And she wanted to go on her own. I was willing to take her. I thought she would be a quiet girl. She was quiet for a month. After that, everything started.
But Aquilina wanted to live a more independent life, not to follow the orders of the landlady.
She made all these rules, be in by a certain time, don't go out after a certain time, don't have people over late. She kept a close eye on me. She heard everything because the floors were so thin, I guess.
Certainly, the setting was one where conflict was almost inevitable. The two apartments shared the same side entrance and stairway to the basement. Noise from the apartment could easily be heard upstairs. Heating the damp basement was only possible using an expensive electric space heater. The Board of Inquiry, in its report, summed up the problems in the following way. First, Mrs. Picoy discovered that Ms. Aquilina wanted to lead an independent life without undue influence and direction from her. Second, Mrs. Picoy began to view Ms. Aquilina as an undesirable tenant who made too much noise and used excessive amounts of heat, water, and light. To some extent, therefore, Mrs. Picoy's harassment was motivated simply by a desire to get rid of a tenant who, in her mind, was causing problems. The Board of Inquiry concluded the matter went beyond a landlord-tenant dispute. Stephanie Picoy treated Karen Aquilina differently because of her handicap, and that constituted harassment.
Miss Aquilina was legally an adult. She had the same rights as everybody else. The respondent testified that she had not treated other tenants in this way, and that because Miss Aquilina had a number of disabilities, that this landlady was going to treat her like a child. You will come home at a certain time. You should not wear so much makeup. What's a retarded girl like you doing having a boyfriend? And these were very hurtful and very damaging to this young woman who believed that no one had the right to treat her that way.
Karen Aquilina was awarded damages of $3,500. While this case illustrates good intentions gone bad, it also clearly indicates that prevailing attitudes towards disabled people will not be tolerated. Coming up next, access to information. For people who are blind or have low vision, access problems are linked not only to stairs and ramps. One of their major concerns is the lack of access to information. Because they can't read newspapers, many blind people are among the most devoted followers of television news networks. But there's a common practice on television these days for weather reports, sports scores, and financial information to be displayed on the screen without an accompanying voiceover. I watched one of these reports with two consumer advocates. Cindy Burley is totally blind, and Eric Schreier has limited vision. Well, a nice musical interlude there, but did anybody know the temperature or the condition in Windsor this morning?
No, I don't. I saw. I knew there was something to do with, I saw the large numbers, but I couldn't see any of the other text, and a lot of details got lost in the background. So unless I walk right up to the TV, far away from it, I can't really tell what it was.
Miss Burley, how do you feel about this?
Well, I find it rather useless to have this information on the TV and not be able to access it. And it's all fine for people to expect blind people to listen to the radio instead of watching TV, since TV, of course, is a visual medium. Having to go out pretty well every day and travel around the city with my job, I need to know what the weather is going to be like day by day. And to have to be glued to the radio to listen for those rather than be able to just pick it up off the TV is really quite a bothersome thing for me.
Now, I think the misconception on most people's part is that people who are visually impaired or totally blind don't watch television. Is that in fact true?
No, not at all.
No, not for me, and I am totally blind, and I tend to watch a fair bit of TV, actually.
Even if you're visually impaired and you can see quite a bit, you have to continuously, crawl up to the front of the TV to see things, and it's much more relaxing if you can sit down and get some of the information in a more accessible form.
Maria Moranowitz is the acting program director for CBC News World.
When we first formatted the programs that we use scrolls in, it was primarily intended, two reasons. One, to give our anchors a break. There's constant chatter, constant talk on the channel, and it gave them a minute to sort of reorganize, take a breath, take a look at where they're going next. And two, we also thought that our audience needed a break from the constant chatter. So I was astonished to learn that so many blind people and visually impaired people watch television. And I mean, I guess it's a factor of educating the public that, we learned that blind people use us. And actually, we had a discussion this morning about whether there really is any way that we could sort of find spots in our schedule that we can actually find somebody or figure out a way to move this information, speaking it, as opposed to just crawling it visually on the screen.
An accompanying voiceover would also be appreciated by people who have to rush out to the kitchen while the TV is on. While the lack of a voiceover creates an information gap for blind people watching news, there's a service called descriptive video, currently available on some PBS programs, that's moving in the opposite direction. They're adding information by describing the action. If you're a regular viewer of Poirot and American PBS stations, then you are well acquainted with the merits of this award-winning series.
A biplane whizzes across the screen, followed by an ocean liner and a streamlined locomotive, churning out a fiery orange cloud.
But there is another dimension to this program. Descriptive Video Service, or DVS, provides visually impaired viewers with narrative descriptions of key visual elements.
Into a triangle of white light, giant sleek letters appear. Agatha Christie's Poirot. He walks further into the tunnel of spotlights.
Actions, settings, scene changes, and body language.
And doffs his hat to the camera. Fade to black.
Mrs. Allen was left-handed, wasn't she?
In a high-tech medium, it's a low-tech solution. To receive DVS, a viewer must have stereo TV with a separate audio program channel or a stereo TV adapter, and live within range of a PBS station that carries DVS programs.
But brain cells registered a lot. Well, there were certain indications.
Visually impaired people are reacting very positively to DVS, like Sunila Waiti.
Well, I found it really nice. Like, it has a lot of description, which it's going to be really helpful for people who don't have any vision.
The important thing is...
Sergei Richard has some vision, but when watching TV, finds it very difficult to pick out important details.
I like it. It would be very useful for myself, and I'm sure for others. It's similar to me, I find, to a book filling in detail. I mean, when you read a book, it'll tell you blue eyes, brown hair. This would fill me in, and I would have a mental image.
He drank, I think. Died a year or two after the marriage.
Miss Plenderleith, who has curly auburn hair and full red lips, lights a cigarette and sits across from Jap.
To Boyd Hippner, DVS has the potential to fill in the detail and nuances on which many television plots hinge.
I've been very frustrated by a great many mysteries because I simply didn't know how they ended.
I'm sorry to be the bearer of such bad news.
Jap stands and walks to the door. Poirot approaches and leans over the desk.
Pardon, monsieur. Allow me to express my deepest sympathy at your loss.
Yes, right, thank you. Stiff upper lip, you know, that's the British way.
Magnifique.
Currently, there are several broadcast industry people working on the development of descriptive video services in Canada. Coming up next, that long-distance feeling. For people with severe physical disabilities, such as cerebral palsy, communication with other people in the past has been very difficult. The Blissboard, which uses a system including symbols and the alphabet, was a real breakthrough. Now the marriage of this system and computer technology has led to even more advances. We have this report from Ottawa by Ken Nias.
Trina Guy is 30 years old and has cerebral palsy, a healthy mind caught in a body that refuses to allow Trina to communicate. For the last few weeks, she's been learning how to use a computer program that could change all that. It's called Blissphone. Ordinarily, when Trina communicates, she has to use something called a Blissboard. It converts language into symbols that are used by handicapped people around the world. She points to symbols in front of her. The person she's talking to reads along.
Letter? No. All right. Did I get that right? No?
The problem is, without someone to read along, communication with another handicapped person is impossible. That's where the computer can make a difference.
You want to send that message today to everybody to introduce yourself? Yeah.
Working with the keyboard, Trina can now communicate without help. The program takes her message and translates it into Bliss. Then, with the touch of a button, the computer sends that message out using a normal phone line. Trina's friend, Danielle Allen, says the system makes a difference.
She can do it independently. She doesn't have to go through an interpreter, tell them what she wants to say and have them talk. She can do it directly. So it's really a big move towards independence and communicating with other people.
Today, Trina is sending a letter. It can take her several seconds to hit the tab key a single time, several more seconds to hit it enough times to move the cursor where she wants it. In spite of all this, she says she loves the program, and Danielle Allen says Trina's been a quick study.
We just went over it once last week, and already she knows how to use the program very well.
The Blissphone program isn't new. It was developed a few years ago by an Ottawa company called IDON. What is new is the latest phase of testing. For the first time, people are going to be able to use the system to call long distance. In fact, the day we visited Trina, she received her first messages from people in other cities. And with Trina's say-so and the help of IDON representative Bill Lalonde, we were able to eavesdrop.
Hello, new bliss symbol, telephone, woman. I want to introduce myself. I am Karen. I work.
The current test of the system is taking place between people in Ottawa, Toronto, and St. John's, Newfoundland. Using her old-fashioned Blissboard, Trina told me where she sent messages so far.
T-O, Toronto, Ontario. There you go.
But the creators of the software think their invention can also help Trina send letters a lot farther than Toronto.
There are facilities in 29 countries, so at least for those users, that user base, ultimately it can lead to an international network of people, pen pals you might say, or whatever.
But the system may help Trina in another way.
She's a very good Bliss user, and she has taken some training programs as well to teach Bliss. And she would like to teach Bliss to other children who are in other schools throughout the city here. And so when I heard about this program, we were both quite excited about it because this could give her that possibility.
Of course, that doesn't mean Trina won't use the system to send and receive messages with pen pals in other cities too. Now that she's learned how, that's something she's resolved to do a lot of. I'm Ken Nias.
When we come back, we'll look at a more traditional way of communicating, magazines. As we said earlier, this is our last show of the season. But if you want to keep informed about disability issues while we're off the air, there are many magazines available. One of them is Abilities, which bills itself as Canada's lifestyle magazine for people with disabilities. Ray Cohen is the editor and publisher of Abilities magazine.
What we could perhaps do is we could take their logo, which shows the international symbol for accessibility, and superimpose it somehow.
His interest in disability issues was sparked when he was in charge of childcare at Alberta Children's Hospital in Calgary.
I just worked with kids with multiple disabilities. And while they were in the hospital, they were very well provided for. They had all kinds of services and so on. But as soon as they left, they sort of fell off of a cliff. Then I began to realize that it wasn't a local problem. It was a national, if not an international problem in terms of the lack of aesthetically presented information. There's a number of publications that are available for professionals who work with people with disabilities. And there's a number of very interesting newsletters that are sort of disability-specific, association-orientated types of publications. But there was no national cross-disability lifestyle magazine per se.
When the magazine first came out, when people first looked at it, they said to me, you know, it's too jock-focused, too sport-focused. What's your response to that?
Well, the truth is that there's a lot of recreational type of material in the magazine. There's a lot of sports material in the magazine, it's true. To call it jock-orientated, I think, is a bit of a misread. In this upcoming issue, there's a major article on deinstitutionalization, which I think is quite important. In the most recent issue, there was also a major article on economic disincentives and what that means for people with disabilities. We're currently running a series on unemployment and employment-related issues, specifically around employment equity. We're in the middle of our literacy series that has to do with literacy and people with disabilities. So to stereotype the magazine as being particularly jock-orientated, I think, is really a misread.
Humor is another ingredient of the magazine that has been there right from the start.
I think that's one of the things that has really made Abilities as well received as it is having John Callahan's presence in the magazine. Because he really gives people an opportunity to laugh, and to laugh at their own situations. You know, he does not walk on eggshells, this man. He himself is a quadriplegic, a cartoonist, and he sees a lot of humor in events and lifestyles that happen for people with disabilities, and he's not afraid to spell it out.
All of the subject matter, humor, sports, arts, social issues, have made Cohen excited about the future.
People, more so than ever before in the history of the world, I suppose, seem interested in in tapping into the potential that people with disabilities have. Not so much because they are people with disabilities, but because they are people and they have the range of talent that exists within mainstream Canada.
Abilities is available through subscription. And here are some of the other national and international magazines that cover topics related to disability. If you're interested in social or political issues, Compass is published by the Coalition of Provincial Organizations of the Handicapped. And Archetype is published by the Advocacy Resource Center for the Handicapped. The Disability Rag comes from Louisville, Kentucky, and deals with the same subject matter from an American perspective. Information, interviews, and technology are covered in Caliper by the Canadian Paraplegic Association and in Paraplegia News, published in the U.S. Vibrations is produced by the Canadian Hearing Society. Sports fans can keep up to date with Wheeler's Choice in Canada and Sports and Spokes in the States. There are also many newsletters available from regional and local associations. And that's our show, almost. I've got one more guest. Susan, welcome back.
Thanks, Joe. Good to be back.
You've had a double lung transplant.
That's right.
When did this happen?
Well, I had it February 10th. It's going to be my new birthday. And I was out in record time, 12 days. Got a couple of shots here myself in hospital.
Super.
And
this one here is
4 days after ICU.
4 days after, and
That's right.
you were sitting up already?
That's right. Did really well. And so now the long, hard road starts. That's just the beginning, but I'm doing great. And I wanted to thank everyone for all the cards and letters and calls that I've been getting. It really helps one get better quicker.
So does this mean that you don't have cystic fibrosis anymore?
No, I've still got cystic fibrosis, but I can breathe air.
Super. Yeah. Well, great to have you back, and we'll look forward to working with you in the fall again.
I look forward to it too, Joe.
Super. And that's the Disability Network for this season. I'm Joe Coughlin.
And I'm Susan Pettit. We'll see you again next fall.
And remember, even if we're not on the air, we'd still like to hear from you. You can write to us at the Disability Network, CBC Television, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. That's the Disability Network, CBC Television, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. Or you can fax us at 416-975-5636.